It's great to have you joining us on Radio Free Georgia's In Tune to Nature program. I'm host Carrie Freeman, coming to you in July of 2024 from Atlanta in the Muskogee Creek Territory in the foothills of the Appalachian Mountain Range. Today, we're going to be talking about ecotourism and how well it incorporates wildlife equity for the wild animals who are often an integral focus of tourists. As ecotourists, we want to see amazing wild animals, but how can we ensure we aren't endangering or harming them and putting ourselves or tourism profit before the lives and well-being of local humans and other animals in these tourism hotspots? To tell us about her concept of wildlife equity and multi-species tourism justice, our guest is Dr. Carol Kline, professor and Hospitality and Tourism Management Program Director in the Department of Management at Appalachian State University in North Carolina. Let me just tell you a little bit about her. Professor Carol Kline developed the Appalachian State University Management Department's first sustainable tourism course. Her research interests focus broadly on tourism planning and development and sustainability, but cover a range of topics such as agritourism, animal welfare in tourism, and tourism impacts to communities. She recently edited two books about the ethics of eating animals within the context of tourism, called Animals, Food, and Tourism, and the other is called Tourism Experiences and Animal Consumption, Contested Values, Morality, and Ethics. Additionally, she's part of a network of researchers who focus on race, ethnicity, and social equity in tourism. Prior to coming to Appalachian State University, Carol worked at East Carolina's Center for Sustainable Tourism and the Department of Recreation and Leisure Studies. She also served for 2 years as the Director of Tourism for Handmade in America. Dr. Kline earned her PhD in Tourism Planning and Policy at North Carolina State University, and her website is drcarolkline.com. Welcome, Dr. Kline.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Please call me Carol.
What first sparked your interest in incorporating animal welfare initiatives into your tourism scholarship?
That is an easy question. So I had a very productive midlife crisis. People tend to argue about when midlife really is, but I saw the age of 50 coming at me. And man, it went by fast. Those decades have gone by fast. And I realized that I really, from a research standpoint, I was not focusing on the types of things that I wanted to truly have an impact in. I really wanted to focus more on the things that I loved. And I had been doing fantastic work.
Yeah,
I loved my career, but animals of all kinds,
yeah.
not just the cute, furry, fluffy ones, the charismatic ones, but the invertebrates, all animals. So I really struggled of whether I should leave academia and just throw myself into animal, welfare, animal rights, and animal organization. But I eventually thought, figured out that I could turn my research in tourism and focus on all the many ways that humans use animals, utilize animals, employ animals within different tourism experiences. And so that's what I'm
Yeah.
doing now. And
Oh,
you mentioned the
so
class.
glad you're doing that.
Yes, thank you. You mentioned the class, sustainable tourism,
Yeah.
that I created, but I think more relevant to this conversation, I teach a class called Animals, Tourism, and Sustainability.
Oh, amazing. I would love to be a student in that class. That's awesome. Well, you recently were the lead author on a co-authored ecofeminist article in the Journal of Travel Research, and it caught my attention. It's called Wildlife Equity for Multi-Species Tourism Justice. I was excited to read it, and I plan to cite it in my book on coexistence with wildlife around park regions. But these are new concepts for most of us. So can you tell us what you mean when you say you're seeking multi-species tourism justice? Kind of as part of sustainable tourism. It sounds very holistic and intersectional.
Yeah, it's a lot of academic words, isn't it? So, I mean, let's break it down. Justice, if we're talking about justice for anybody, and when I say anybody, I include non-human animals within that. If we're talking about justice for anybody, they need to be treated fairly, whether that's groups of humans or groups of animals. And the trick is finding out how do we do that, because it's particularly in the case of non-human animals, we can't ask them what they feel would be fair. And there's so many species that we're still getting a handle on what their life cycle is like, what their lifestyle is like, what they need to thrive. And so tourism justice really focuses on the fact that as humans, as tourists, we tend to take from the places we visit. We consume, whether that's consuming food, consuming with our eyes. We are consumers. We buy souvenirs. We buy experiences. And
Yeah.
so if we're going to be taking, let's have some thought about how to do that in a fair way to the communities that we're visiting. Now, the multi-species part of that, about that, that's just a fancy way of saying not just humans,
Right.
y'all. There's other stakeholders here in the world that that bear the brunt, that bear the cost of us visiting places where they live.
Yeah, I like how you used also in the article used the term deep justice,
Mhm.
like which I that reminds me of deep ecology, not just ecology, but deep ecology. So I really like that term to mean let's not be so anthropocentric about our notion of justice and let's have it relate to all animals besides just humans.
So that
Yeah.
term, I have to credit Dr. David Fennell. That's not
Yeah.
my term. That's his
Okay.
term. He is at Brock University, and in 2012, Dr. Fennell, and Brock University is in Canada on the East Coast. And in 2012, he published a book, Tourism and Animal Ethics. And it wasn't an edited volume. He wrote this
Yeah.
book, and it's just come out. The second version has just come out. But that really kicked off a lot of interest in the academic community and the tourism academic community about, oh, so I was concerned about these things, and now Dr. Fennell is writing about these things. He's prolific. He writes about
Great.
animals, he writes about wildlife. He's editor for the Journal of Ecotourism.
Great.
And so he came up with a concept called the scales of justice, which are different levels of justice, and deep justice is the deepest,
Yeah.
the
Those
greatest
kind of
level of justice.
biocentric. Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
I like that. And one of the problems you identify in current sustainable tourism is that wild animals become dependent on humans in some cases. Can you give an example or explain how this dependence disadvantages wild animal individuals?
Yeah, so again, I'm going to look to another scholar, Dr. Bob Fisher. Comes to us from philosophy and from ethics, and he's recently written about this right after COVID-19. He put out a book in articles asking these questions, addressing this very topic, and animals, let me give you an example.
Yeah.
So a lot of people go to animal attractions to see animals. And these are either captive animals that you go and you view, and maybe you learn about them. Maybe you just go, oh, hey, cool, that's an elephant, that's a giraffe. But then there's other types of attractions like sacred temples that have, monkeys around,
Mhm.
or uh, that are sort of a center gathering spot for wildlife. Well, in both of these cases, revenue, the management of
Yeah.
these attractions are dependent upon the revenue from tourists, and they're dependent upon the revenue from tourists to maintain the animal health. And so truly, with tourism shutting down within that long time span of COVID, when people weren't traveling, the animals suffered. The
Oh,
animals were
man.
dependent upon the tourist dollar. And that's probably the best example
Right.
of, yeah. And so Bob asks all these sort of ethical, questions. Is there a moral obligation for the people in the community to take on the care of these animals? Is it a mistake to even set up these relationships in the first place?
Right.
Uh, is it someone's collective opportunity? And then if we all accept that it's collective opportunity, then what does that say about the animals that we don't feel collective responsibility outside of that narrow context of a tourism attraction?
Right. Like the free living animals, you mean,
Yeah,
that are in the
yeah,
world that are affected by us.
exactly.
And I also like this quote of yours from the article about reducing risk in wildlife tourism. It says, human welfare has been privileged over concerns with other species, making wildlife and other non-human animals the victims of irresponsible tourism management. Wildlife should have the same degree of protection from tourists as tourists should have from wildlife. Can you speak to how that protection could be enacted for wildlife as well as tourists?
Wow. Yeah. I mean, these are big thoughts, right? These are like big assertions.
Yeah.
And part of the purpose of articles like these is to get people thinking.
Yeah.
What would that look like? Could that even really be achieved for wildlife to have the same types of equity and justice afforded to them as we like to afford other humans? And we haven't even gotten that right yet. So, of our own species. So I guess I'll address your question in a couple ways.
Yeah.
So Andrea Sachs wrote. I'll take the last part first. Andrea Sachs is a journalist for the Washington Post, and she wrote a piece in 2023, and it was literally called "Why Can't Tourists Stop Messing with Wild Animals?" And this came on the heels of a lot of incidents in US national parks where people were getting hurt because they couldn't stop messing with the wild animals, whether that was trying to pose, with selfies,
Ah,
or whether they find an animal and they feel like it's been abandoned. They find like a baby deer and they got all upset. Meanwhile, the mom is nearby.
right.
Um, it's a wonderful piece to also get you thinking about why we shouldn't insert ourselves in these ecosystems. So if we don't insert ourselves, that's one way to address your question. Maybe there won't be as many incidences of
Yeah.
us getting hurt by wild animals. But I think the bigger question in my mind is the first part of your question. How do we really think about wildlife justice and how we can afford justice to animals? And I was talking with the second author on that paper, Hen Heemstra. She is in Norway at Nord University. Brilliant, brilliant mind. And I was talking with her today in preparation for this interview with you, Carrie. And we were talking about how the way to do that, the tool that we have to use to do that, is something called empathetic sense making.
Okay.
Okay,
Empathetic sense making.
yeah, empathetic sense making. And I'm gonna talk about this. I'm gonna frame this in the context of companion animals.
Yeah.
Probably some of your listeners have dogs or cats or other animals at home, that they're pets by, the common vernacular, but they're also family members, right?
Right.
And we know these animals. We know these animals are individuals. I have two dogs myself, and one dog is very, very different from the other. Not because we've had conversations and they said, well, my brother is more like this and I'm more like that. But I am empathetic. I live with them day in and day out, and so I have a long and deep connection with them. And so I know their personalities, right?
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people who are listening may be able to identify this. So if we extend that same kind of empathetic sense making, and the sense making is making sense of, why Ursa barks, she's like a little aggressive. Well, it's
Yeah.
because she's very anxious. Um, so I am in the role of making sense of Ursa's behavior, because I'm empath, and I take the time to do that because I'm empathetic to her needs. So, when you think about the dynamic of you're visiting Iceland and you're
Yeah.
with a tour guide and you're looking at the Icelandic horses that are wild.
Yeah.
Okay, there's three different actors in that scenario. There's you, the tourist. There's the guide, and there's the Icelandic horses. I'm going to assume you don't know a lot about Icelandic horses. That's why you went there. You wanted to learn.
Yeah.
The horses are not going to come up to you and be like, "Hey, Carrie, this is what my life is like." So it's really up to that guide to use as a tool to employ empathetic sense making. We're going to assume that he or she has a connection with that Icelandic horse or horses, and they
Yeah.
know them not just at a book knowledge, but they know about the horses because they're listening, they're watching, they're observing. So it sounds a little kind of woo-woo or weird, but I think it's just transferring what we do with our companion animals to other animals, realizing
Yeah.
that they're the same, especially, when we're talking about this level of like mammals, but birds are as well. And fishes have pain and they have social groups. So it's really just sort of taking the time and believing that the guide has taken the time
Right.
to allow that space where he or she can give you a peek
Yeah.
into what they know about the particular animals that you're
And
experiencing.
then we could better meet the needs of those Icelandic
Yes.
horses by not getting too close to them, or if it's their time with their babies, maybe they don't want us around at all. Like just adjusting what we're doing
Yeah.
to when someone has figured out the needs. I also wanted to say I'm wearing a shirt today, which is also effective
See,
on radio, that
great.
says "Don't pet the bison" from Yellowstone National Park. I thought it was kind of a funny shirt, and then people were like, "No." I guess people try to pet the bison, and because I've seen the bison in Yellowstone and it is magnificent. But like, yeah, the thought that someone would feel that they should get that close, or they probably just wanted a picture. So yeah, to your point, that people mess with wildlife without really thinking about it from their standpoint.
Yeah, so to wrap that up, your bison example, like they could get hurt,
Yeah,
but also they're definitely not employing empathetic sense making of, oh, maybe this bison has an idea of how close they want us to get.
right.
I'm living my bison life, and you coming up to me just isn't what I am interested in right now. But
Yeah,
we
right.
generally
Or
will
if he gets too habituated to people, then he's like you're causing a problem for him if he gets and you're not thinking about his long-term well-being,
correct.
right? Yeah. If you're just joining us on Radio Free Georgia, this is In Tune to Nature, and I'm host Carrie Freeman talking about sustainable wildlife tourism and what it means to foster wildlife equity. Our guest is Dr. Carol Kline, professor in the Department of Management and Appalachian State University in North Carolina. And she's also the director of their Hospitality and Tourism Management Program. Her website is drcarolkline.com. Carol, you also have some recommendations. You and your co-authors came up with a list of potential manifestations of wildlife equity and what it would look like in tourism if it was more animal centric. And so we only have time to discuss a few, but I was going to ask you, one of them you say is there should be more transparency about wildlife equity in the tourism marketing or maybe the product labeling.
Yeah.
Can you think of an example of that where maybe the marketing is not telling us enough about the animal experience to know whether we even want to participate?
Yeah, yeah. No, I love this question. So yeah, we tried to give some practical examples of what this would look like,
Yeah.
what wildlife equity would look like. If you think about typical marketing of, you want to go to, I'll just use Norway. You want to go to Norway and you could have this fishing experience, you could have this scuba diving experience, you could have this culinary experience, okay? For
Yeah.
each of those different things that I said, there could be an animal centered in that image.
Yeah.
Okay. So if we see people fishing, we're sort of and yeah, so if we see people fishing, we're sort of desensitized to the fact that yeah, that's a normal activity. You pull a fish out of the water and that is a thing.
Yeah.
But we're not thinking about that particular fish in that picture, in that marketing image, is actually an endangered fish, or maybe it's on the way to becoming endangered. So not even thinking about the animal sentience, not even
Right.
thinking about that individual agency. Of course, that fish doesn't want to be pulled out of the water. Um,
Right.
but but thinking about, well, maybe the tourism agency is being irresponsible in choosing that photo because they don't know enough about the ecosystem there, to
Yeah.
know that we don't want to encourage people to catch that type of fish. It's kind of like on social media. If you see someone riding an elephant, and this is a
Right.
good example because now people are aware that you shouldn't ride elephants. If you see someone riding an elephant, you're like, that looks cool. I want to do that. If you
Yeah, I
see
like elephants.
yeah, if you see someone posing by a tiger, oh, that's cool. I want to do that. Well, now we need to be more responsible. And Instagram has finally, not finally, but social media platforms are finally starting to scratch that surface. They have a warning label. If you search for elephant riding on
Yeah.
Instagram, a warning will come up and say, what you just searched for could be an animal welfare violation.
Oh, that's good. Or sometimes they allow us to flag things too, or like that we think are irresponsible selfies with wild animals and things like that. Yeah.
It's,
So
it's
that's important too.
Yeah, the tourism industry really has a responsibility to know what's in their image that they're using to market, or even the messaging.
Yeah.
Come eat cabrito in Monterrey, Mexico, because if you haven't done that, you're not, eating like a local. Well, that's not entirely true. Cabrito, which is baby goat, is used for is eaten in celebrations. It's a very special meal. It's not something that everybody eats every day. And so now the industry is marketing it such and like driving up the demand. So that's irresponsible.
Right. Yeah, for newborn baby goats to be killed, right? And
Right.
so they're misrepresenting things. That gets me into my next question, even though we're running kind of low on time, but I wondered about your recommendations about wildlife equity in terms of food consumption in sustainable tourism. Can I also make, since I have my bison shirt on, I remember in Yellowstone that like it would be weird, like right outside of Yellowstone, there'd be bison burgers for sale in Gardner, Montana. And I'm like, I I just, or in Florida and the Everglades and stuff, they're eating alligator meat. And I just think
Eat whale
that's
meat. Hmm.
odd. Yeah,
Yeah.
like, or I don't understand our love for them and we want to see them but we also want to literally consume them. So anyway, there's just that issue.
Yeah, wild game is the same in some of the African nations. I mean, a lot of scholars have written about this in the
Yeah.
tourism literature. The wildlife that you go to see, you also, ends up on your plate.
Yeah. And so do you have some food consumption and sustainable tourism recommendations that you kind of want to share I guess they're for tourism operators or something?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, whether a person makes a decision to, eat animals, that's another issue. But if you're going to travel, a lot of times when people travel, they want to eat special things and they want to connect with the local culture.
Right.
So I think, first of all, when the demand is ramped up, either by the tourists wanting it or the industry saying you should do it, tourists, when demand is ramped up, supply has to work awfully hard to meet that demand, and sometimes that means cutting corners in welfare, cutting corners in quality, cutting corners in environmental, degradation of,
Yeah.
of the production of whatever animal we're talking about. Um, but I think too, if one chooses to eat animals, it would be, I think it would be nice to know about the supply chain of that animal. It's kind of like the labeling that we have animal
Yeah.
welfare approved. There's different labeling systems according to organics, grass fed, which don't have anything to do with welfare. But just to know a little bit something about the welfare of the animals that you're eating. And I know when people travel, they want to do things that kind of are statusy. It's like I went to Peru and I ate a guinea pig. But I don't know, think twice about it, because the more you want to vote with your pocketbook, the more you
Right.
do something as a tourist, the more you're letting the industry there know, whether there is Florida or Peru, that you're endorsing the practice. And
Yes.
so vote with your pocketbook and do your research.
Yeah, I like that. And just because they present something to you doesn't mean you have to kind of fall for that and say, well, I should eat this type of animal because I'm here or something. But yeah, like you still have a choice about what your own ethics are, in deciding kind of it. Well, because as a vegan, I'm lucky to travel all around the world. And so maybe I'm not always eating exactly what everyone's wanting, but I find all kinds of really great food in every city I've ever been to and still enjoy every place I go, even like coastal places that can be very kind of quote unquote seafood oriented. You can still find experiences that aren't fishing and aren't eating fish.
I think folks, when they're traveling to a culture that's different from their own or a region that's different than their own, they feel the pressure not to be rude to the host,
That's true.
but you're really not. You're actually just enacting principles that you believe in, just like you would, other principles, gender roles, different things that
Right.
values you carry around with you. I would say make sure you pack them on your trip as well.
Oh, I like that. Well, to wrap up, Dr. Kline, what are some things we can do as responsible tourists when we're planning trips involving wild animals and we want to follow kind of a multi-species justice tourism principle?
Yeah, I think the minimum that we can do and the minimum we owe all of the non-human animals that are going to be in our consumption experience, our travel experience, the minimum we can do is do our research. And if you are on a website and you're looking at a tour operator, let's say, or an attraction, and what they do is offer animal experiences. If those are high welfare experiences, if the animals have enough space, if they have, an agency to say, no, I don't feel like being touched today by
They have
tourists.
some privacy or they can get away from the tourists.
Yeah, if they look like they're in good condition, they're, generally you use your own empathetic sense making as you're looking at
Right.
the website, then they're going to tell you about it because that's a differentiating factor. If you're a business and you're offering high welfare tours or something that's good for the environment, it would be kind of silly as a business not to use that as a differentiating factor. Come on my tour because we do this. We're a B Corp. We're certified by blah blah blah. We subscribe to these animal welfare. They will tell you about the codes of ethics and standards that they adhere to. The Global Federation of Animal Sanctuaries, they might be a member of that.
Yeah.
And so look for that. Do the research because it should be out there. If somebody's putting forth all the effort to have these wonderful practices, they're also going to tell you about it.
Yeah, and I just went on a whale watching tour in near Juneau, Alaska, and then I looked for one that was part of the Whale Sense program because I had heard about that. And then
Big.
they have it on their website and on the boat, they explain to you what that means about the way they're not going to cut the whale off in the direction they're swimming, and they're not going to get too close, or they're not going to harass the whales, or just different things. And so, yeah, so I appreciate that. And then it makes me feel like, yes, this is the company I want to go with. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. A lot of people around the world have put thought into this and have developed guidelines and standards. So we should seek them out as tourists and make sure that we're taking advantage of that. And then we know we're making a good purchase.
right. Well, that's the end of our show, but I want to thank you, Professor Carol Kline, for being with us on Radio Free Georgia's In Tune to Nature program. Thanks for helping champion more multi-species justice and equity in the tourism industry to make sure we're being fair not only to human communities, but other animal communities as well.
Oh, it's been great, Carrie. Thank you.
And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in to In Tune to Nature, broadcasting every Wednesday at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time, online at wrfg.org and on Atlanta radio station 89.3 FM. We post action items, news, and podcasts on the show's website, facebook.com/In Tune to Nature. The views and opinions expressed on this show do not necessarily reflect those of WRFG, its board, staff, or volunteers. I'm one of those volunteers. I'm host Carrie Freeman, asking you to please support independent, non-commercial media like Radio Free Georgia. And remember to take care of yourself and others, including other species. such as when you're traveling. Thank you for listening. Cheers.